In this episode, we're going to look at how Dragon speech recognition can be helpful for kids with literacy challenges like dyslexia. I often get asked by parents and by professionals whether Dragon will even work with younger people, and when I tell them it often can, they'll say, well, how do I use it? I usually encourage them to go and talk to experts who can understand their children holistically and look at their physical, their cognitive, the personality dimensions that make up the whole person, and who can then tailor programs that address those specific needs. And that may include Dragon or it may not. I'm inordinately happy tonight to have not one but two experts like those that I've just described. And I'm looking forward this evening to finding out how Dragon can be used to help students to be more literate and hopefully more productive. Shannon Chapman and Mel Nichols join us from Dare Speech Technology. Welcome along. In case it's not obvious, Mel and Shannon are speech pathologists, and I met them a couple of years ago at an event on the Gold Coast, an educational conference. I'd just started at the event and I'd just spoken to a group of teachers who told me how bad Dragon had been and how they couldn't help their students use it. And it wasn't a great start to the event. I was feeling a bit sad. And then Mel and Shannon came up and made me feel a whole lot better because they were so enthusiastic about how Dragon had helped their clients in certain situations. Dare Speech Pathology is a private speech pathology practice in Toowong in Brisbane, quite close to the University of Queensland, where I went to university. Know it very well. I used to live around the corner from where they are, so it's a great spot to be working. Shannon describes herself as a techspert and assures me that she's hard to stop once she gets started talking about accessibility and technology. So it should be a really easy job for me tonight to get her going, and then I'm sure Mel will join in very easily as well because I know she has certain skills in those areas too. Just before I get them both going, just to mention that we've reviewed the questions that some of you sent in with the registration information that you provided, and Mel and Shannon have been through them and they're going to cover most of those questions, I think, in the session tonight. My job tonight is to watch what comes in on the web, and you can post questions there and I'll forward it over to these two and interrupt them and try and put them off their focus, if you like. So now over to you two, and let's get started and tell us more about how Dragon might be of use to some of your clients.
Well, thank you for having us, Derek. And
pleasure. Thank you for coming.
Thank you everyone who's tuning in at home. We're really excited to be able to share about Dragon. We've had some great success with it for our students and have seen it have a big impact in the classroom and on students' self-confidence. So we're really excited to be able to share some tips and tricks and how it can be used. We've seen it used quite well. So what we're going to cover, Shannon's going to talk through Dare's approach to using this technology, some of the different students that different student subgroups that we've used the program with, and also the general age that we tend to introduce assistive technology options and Dragon. We'll talk you through just a couple of things about setting up with hardware and also how to set up the Dragon user profile. The process is slightly different for what you do with an adult user.
Yeah, versus the student.
Yeah. And then we'll talk you through some outcomes from our clinical experience and also some common concerns and how to address those so that it can be used in the classroom.
Yes.
And we'll leave some time for questions at the end as well.
Sounds like a full program. You'd better get cracking.
Speak quickly. No. All right. So the kinds of, I guess, how we got started was Dare opened, I guess, as quite a generalist paediatric practice, but we slowly developed a special interest in literacy and trying to help students access the curriculum that were really not reading and writing well. So we worked in traditional literacy therapy, we still do, but there was a huge need, or we could see a huge need for students who had amazing language skills or good cognitive ability and yet couldn't get their thoughts down onto paper and were in essence running out of time, I guess, to get those skills up to speed and to catch up with their peers. So I think one of our very first clients was having significant mental health issues in terms of anxiety, school refusal, and was actually having physical sort of aversions to going to school. And it was all around frustration and anxiety over not being able to read and write, basically. So I knew there had to be a solution out there, and that really got us, I guess, Googling and searching and trying to find whether the technology that adults use quite comfortably could be used for these students to relieve some of the pressure of school. So initially we really, we weren't just looking at speech to text, although that was obviously a big part of it. We were also looking at text to speech, visual mind mapping, organisation tools to I guess give them a toolkit with which to get round whatever difficulties they were having. Unfortunately, these things weren't being done. Certainly, when I started, they weren't being done in Australia. Certainly not very well. But we're lucky enough that the US and the UK have some good models. Yeah, they're leading the way. They have some good models, and I guess the population is bigger, so they had more case studies and more of a chance to try these things out. So we kind of tried to piggyback off what was going on there, and that's where we went. So I guess initially our users, the students that we were seeing, our student users, were really the dyslexic students, the ones who had great oral language skills, you could have really informed conversations with, but who just could not read and write at single word level or at any extended kind of level. Interestingly, as we got more comfortable with assistive technology, we started to see students that had problems with fine motor skills, so handwriting, that more dysgraphic student. Obviously, these things can overlap as well. You can have one student with more than one disorder. As the software improved over the years, the versions improved, we started to see that we could use the software quite comfortably with students who had such severe phonological difficulties, which means sound processing problems, that even their speech was affected. So that was really the underlying issue that was causing so much of their literacy difficulties. And that's become better and better, I guess, as the versions have gone on, I think we'd say.
Were you having success early on, or have you had to wait for a while before it got good enough to use?
It was difficult for us, so version 11 and 11.5 were time consuming and quite tedious, but version 12 there was a significant improvement, and version 13 now blows 12 out of the water by miles.
Interesting.
We tend to use the academic version because our students can get discounts as being a student user, as long as they can prove that they're a student. And that makes a huge difference on the financial burden, I guess, to the families using these
The
things.
software's the same, so it's really just, I think we've covered this before, it's just a discount for students.
Yeah, exactly. So we haven't yet tried 14, and
We'll get you to that, yeah.
some of the schools, though, have bought the professional version because as a site license for their students, so that's also been really good, the features involved with that. There was actually a question that came through prior to the webinar tonight that was asking about ESL students. For those who don't know what ESL is, it's actually students who have English as a second language. That's what it stands for. Our particular clinical experience hasn't been great in that area, I guess, but it's more to do with our geographical location, the demographics in the area that we work in. So we do know the research around that, but clinically we haven't had as much experience in that area. But we
have found with some of our students who have like oral language problems as well, so difficulty formulating their ideas just when they're speaking as well, that Dragon has improved that as well as helping with their written language. And I would say that it's similar case with ESL students.
Yes.
So having to learn to dictate means you pronounce more clearly. Is that kind of what you mean?
It's less the pronunciation and more the formation. So being able to express your thoughts more clearly without having those and and
This is an argument we've actually, this is off topic, but we've been making the same argument for lawyers actually, because lawyers don't do dictation so much anymore. They've lost a lot of that ability as lawyers. So it doesn't just apply to younger people.
No, and it is a skill, and we touch
Thinking on your feet.
Yeah, we touch on that. We touch on that a little bit later, so we will speak about it more. And I guess the thing that you'll find from our presentation is that we don't promote Dragon or any assistive technology as a cure-all. It is not something that is going to fix what is going on. It does have some remediation benefit, I think you'll find, but it isn't something that is going to fix whatever underlying issue is going on for that student. To do that, you need to do intensive systematic therapy, especially for literacy, to have any effect. What this does is relieve some pressure and allow those kids who have academic and cognitive potential to reach that potential. It's a bypass, it's a get around in a lot of ways.
We've really found that it can be preventative as well. So for students with literacy difficulties, as they continue to struggle accessing the curriculum, it can lead to then problems with learning that higher level vocabulary you access in written text at school as opposed to just conversational language. So giving them Dragon and other assistive technology programs means that they can then go on to develop those other skills and not be held back.
And just for people who may not be aware of some of those other technologies, what sort of other packages go with Dragon in this case?
So I guess we have our favourites. They're not always the ones that we're going to use for everyone,
that's okay.
but our golden three would be Dragon, Read and Write Gold, and we love a program called Got It, which is a text prediction program. So we find it has features in it that the prediction feature in Read and Write Gold doesn't have. It doesn't quite hit the spot. But we still can't get rid of Read and Write Gold because of its features as well. So we find they neatly sit together, and I guess the student learns to pull out what tool they need.
And I know you can't generalise from student to student, but is it often that a student will have more than one piece of software in those cases, or you'll tend
absolutely.
to
It's I would say even except for the few students we've had who have just had fine motor problems. So they've come to me because they need to find someone who works with Dragon. Some occupational therapists do, but obviously through the grapevine they've heard my name. They do not have any literacy or language problems, but they have fine motor or gross motor problems that make typing difficult. And one student, once we set up her Dragon, she wrote a novel of her own bat, but she didn't need to see me for any other literacy intervention or any other language intervention. So she didn't need any other software. She was just a Dragon user.
Just to be clear then, the advantage, the way I always thought of Dragon is that if a student has difficulty getting the connection between what they're thinking of saying and then getting it out onto paper, Dragon can help in the situations where you want to unblock that and get the language out.
Yeah, we typically think about Dragon as writing, Got It as writing, but through typing, and Read and Write Gold is primarily reading, but also vocabulary and things like that. So they tackle different areas. Different assistive technology tackles different issues.
Understood.
Yeah.
So before we jumped into setting up a Dragon profile for students, we just wanted to touch on a couple of hardware things. We've had a few questions come through talking about unsuccessful experiences using the software, and I suppose from our experience, we're really happy with Dragon 13, but we've noticed frustration occur when the hardware you're using doesn't mean the software can perform optimally. So don't underestimate the quality of the computer you're using, the quality of the headset you're using in allowing Dragon to do its job well.
Just before you go on, could you just say
sure.
that the Megalegs just didn't catch the names? You've got it, Megalegs. Could you just say the three names of that software again?
Yeah, and I should spell one of them.
Yeah.
So there's Read and Write Gold, which is actually made by Text Help. It's a UK-based company, but they do have an Australian version. Obviously Dragon, and Got It. It's spelt interestingly because it was actually designed by a dyslexic software engineer. So it's GHOTIT. So if you're trying to search for that, you definitely have to spell it correctly.
One word?
All
Yes.
one word,
Yeah.
yes.
Got it.
You got it? Good.
So yeah, just back on hardware quickly. Dragon's produced some really helpful laptop specifications, and we've used those as a good guideline when we're recommending or providing some guidance to parents who are shopping for a laptop. And we also sometimes provide that to school IT departments if they're trying to figure out if they can run the Dragon software on their computer. So hop on the Nuance website to get those specifications, and it's a good guideline for the minimum specifications you'll need. Often our students are running Text Help, Read and Write Gold, Dragon, Got It, Word, Internet. So that's the minimum baseline you need.
Yeah.
And if you want it to ping and be really fast, you want a good quality computer. That's what we found in our experience.
Yeah. And sometimes you have to sacrifice weight or portability sometimes to get that CPU or RAM. And we're not IT experts, but that's just what we've seen, I guess.
We were talking about some of the challenges in the school systems having computers that really aren't up to running some of the modern software, but I think I'd be right in saying that most modern devices you can get, as long as you've got enough memory, are probably fast enough, right?
Yes. Yeah, it's really how many gigahertz that CPU can get up to that really we find quite crucial.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the other thing that's really good to invest in is a headset. So we've brought our one along. It's from the list that Dragon has also put out about recommendations for headsets. But there's a few, I suppose, features that we really like this headset for. First of all, it's monaural, so the single earpiece means that students can use it in class because they just have one headset they can one earpiece they can listen through, and the other ear's free for them to listen to the class teacher without taking the headset on and off. This little button here lets you control the microphone from this button rather than from the toolbar turning on and off that way. And we've just found that simpler and easier for students that we're working with. The other thing is that the microphone that we've got here is noise cancelling. So in a classroom environment, if you've got Bob sitting next to you chatting away, it won't pick up what he's saying. And you can also speak at quite a quiet volume and it will still pick up what you're saying. So we've just found that a good headset makes a big difference, particularly with integrating the software use into the classroom.
And particularly with this client group, in that their speech is not always clear and that they do often lose their train of thought. That mute button is really helpful for this client group. So I know that the software comes with a headset. We tend to advise our clients, for the reasons we outlined, to invest in a different headset.
And we test a lot of headsets. It's on our support page on the website, but we don't test everything, so just because it's not on the website doesn't mean it doesn't work. But noise cancelling is important, and being validated for speech recognition is important. The other thing a boom does is keeps the microphone a set distance from the mouth, so it stops the mic moving around and the audio volume going up and down all the time, which particularly for this group of users is probably fairly important.
So what we're going to do is quite artificial, but we're about to show you how we would go through the process of setting up a profile for a student user.
I'll just flip it around for you to make it easier.
The great thing about this headset is you can work out which ear you like to have it on. So
I'm the student.
Yes, she's the student today. So for people who aren't familiar with Dragon and the setup process, we're not going to go into that in too much detail, but it does come up with now just a short paragraph that you need to read to set up, to get the basic setup of that profile happening. It used to be about a 10-minute, they would say, profile, but we were speaking earlier and I was explaining that for one of my really severe students with version 11, before we got any of the upgrades, it took me 1 hour to get him to set his profile up in the way that I'm about to show you, so that it was clear and accurate enough to begin training from the beginning.
But with the latest version, we can set it up in maybe 3 minutes or something and spend the rest of the session working on the next thing we're going to talk about, which is ongoing training to increase the accuracy of the speech recognition.
Yeah. So I guess the most important thing to remember is that the students are using the software because their reading and writing skills are not always great. They're not optimal. So even if they can read, we tend to find that their reading can be filled with hesitations and slightly disfluent. So we tend to actually angle the computer away from the student and stop them from reading, basically. And we set up a parroting kind of system where I will read, Mel will copy. Depending on the student's difficulties, so if they're not just dyslexic, or if they have short-term memory problems, verbal memory problems, and can't remember large chunks of information, or if larger chunks of information become less clear, which then affects the speech recognition, it's the adult reader's job, the person setting up the profile, to manage that. So I won't give her as much information if she can't cope with it, I guess, or if it affects the speech quality of her voice. So we're going to have a little bit of a play now. Just bear with me while I get it set up. So the mute button is key for this stage. So I'm just going to start. I am reading this text out loud.
I am reading this text out loud.
Clearly and naturally.
clearly and naturally.
So even in the first little bit, you actually get a really good feel for whether Mel's got, even if I haven't done an assessment on a student, whether she's got the capability and I can stretch her a bit further and give her a little bit more. So I'm going to do that to her now. I will continue to use this tone when I dictate with the product.
I will continue to use this tone when I dictate with the product.
Right. So I guess here the key is if they make a mistake or they say a word slightly unclear or jumbled, which is really common with this client group, especially dyslexics, and they say something like characteristically, which was a really good one in the version 11. None of our kids could say characteristically. We had to skip over that word quite a bit. You just keep going. Don't stop them. Don't make them feel bad. It's not them we're trying to change. It's the software we will adapt later, and we'll get to that. All right. Sometimes beforehand, you will need to get the student to practice a little bit of copying with you to get them comfortable with the cues that you're using when you're turning the mic on and off. And that can also give you a bit of a feel as to whether you need to really shorten it down. For some students, we go even further than I showed you at first, and it will be something like, I am, then you turn it off. Reading this, it's really short bits of information, and that obviously drags out how long it takes.
Before you take that off, can I give you some
yes.
feedback on placement of microphones?
Oh, yes, you
too,
can.
Because it's right in front of your mouth, so it
Yes,
should be,
so it should be off to the
Two
side.
should be
fingers.
off to the
Yep.
side.
Not modelling properly.
No.
Not modelling.
So yeah, so we set all of that stuff up as we go usually. But,
This is probably, you'll probably cover this shortly, but a question from SJB. SJB is asking about students, strategies for handling a student when the voice changes because of speech problems and the student has to clear their throat repeatedly and gets fatigued with the voice. Is there anything you can do about that?
yeah, look, it depends, I guess, why those things are going on. I would say you would build into, I guess this is more in the training section, which we're about to cover, but you would build in teaching them to turn off before they start to clear their throat. They'll know they're going to clear their throat before they actually do it, so you would have them turn it off. You would also teach them to dictate in a chunking or phrasing style so that there is less output, so therefore the fatigue doesn't get too high and therefore the speech clarity doesn't drop off.
And I think another thing, we've seen a few questions come through talking about students with other issues going on, and Dragon isn't a replacement for other traditional therapies or other approaches that you'd use. So for a student with voice issues, you'd want to be doing things like vocal hygiene, having water there and those kind of things. So it's not a cure-all, as Shannon said earlier. You want to combine it or integrate it into your therapy approach.
Okay, so the holistic
A
approach.
holistic approach, yes.
Do I get bonus
Lovely
points for
buzzwords.
saying
Yes,
holistic?
nicely done.
Yes, Sailor would like to know which headset you recommend, and I'm not what brand or model.
Okay, so really it's the features that we go for. The headset we use, or the one that we've got here, is the Andrea headset. It's the NC181
yeah.
model.
Yeah.
Again, it's not the brand that matters, it's those features to look for that we really search for.
So really just the noise cancelling.
Noise cancelling, one ear, mute button.
Okay. There's a whole variety of headsets
Yes.
you can use that
Yeah.
fit the characteristic. Often things like the size of the headset itself, whether it fits the person you're fitting it to, and so on. Some of those things are important too, quite often.
Yeah.
So, and you're not limited to headsets. Have you ever used array microphones or anything like that? Is that ever?
No, we haven't
Okay.
ever yet. And it's the only issue we've had, I guess, with this headset in particular is that these headsets are going into school bags most of the time, and they're not necessarily as robust as you would like for a student.
We get hard cases and
So
protect them that way.
They're actual like pencil case. We literally use pencil cases, and you can get some good ones from Officeworks and Smiggle and all sorts of cool things now. And you can actually just fold the headset, not too much, but neatly in there, and it gets chucked in the bag. The headset's protected from the knocks and the kicks and the things like that. So,
Interesting.
yeah.
Thank you.
So moving on to training, it's a bit different with using Dragon with a student rather than with adults. I know that Shannon and I, after that initial setup that we just talked you through, our profiles were pretty much ready to go. We might have to correct a few words here and there where it misrecognises maybe a word like dyslexia that you need to put in because it's more specific to your profession or something like that. But really, we could hit the ground running.
And we were reading our profiles, obviously, as
Yeah.
people who can read and write quite well. So yeah, for students, you've got that added
Yes,
consideration.
Consideration.
Sorry,
Yeah.
back one on
Yeah, no,
headsets.
sure.
Do you know if the headset can plug into an iPad as well? When
No.
the students.
No.
No,
It's a
No.
USB.
it's USB, which we actually like as well, rather than using that audio jack.
There's probably a new iPad out very, very recently that might actually
Yes,
work with.
yes,
Yes.
true. Yeah.
Yes, so back on to training, keep the questions rolling in though. With these students, it's unrealistic to expect that after that initial setup, you'll be able to take it into the classroom straight away that day and get it up and running perfectly. Really, it's a marathon, not a sprint, and you need to help the students get the tech skills, you know, to coordinate pressing the microphone and talking, developing the dictation skill, and developing the profile to learn that student's way of speaking. So we have used the software with students who have unclear speech, with students who have formulation issues, so trouble thinking of what they want to say and putting it into, you know, a grammatically correct sentence. So all of these things need to happen in a safe one-on-one environment with someone who, you know, like Shannon or I, knows how to get the software to recognise that student's voice.
And certainly it's not always the case that it has to be a professional. A lot of the time we try and pass on our knowledge to a parent because they've got more access to the student and it's more cost effective. But there are times when that's not an option because we know, for example, for dyslexia, it's a genetic condition. So if you're taking on the role as the trainer as the adult and your spelling skills are about equal to the student you're trying to help, then that's not going to work. So there are times for certain, you know, for certain clients that will extend the training time when we have to, to help that student because perhaps the parents don't have the skills to do that. So again, it's really individual.
But
variable.
we have had a success, you know, teaching parents to be that trainer or a teacher aide at school. So it really is about collaborating with the other people in that child's world and just making sure everyone feels supported in the process and to expect things to go wrong. We're working with technology, we're working with children, you know, things aren't going to be smooth all of the time and that's okay. So normally the training would happen in a joint session with the student wearing the headset and the Dragon trainer being there to support the student. And you might need to start, you know, scaffolding it to that student's level. Can they handle controlling the microphone button and talking at the same time? Or do you need to be in charge of that mute button or that microphone button and just let them think of what they're talking about?
Yeah. And I think sometimes we also find we have to sometimes get them to say that practice out loud first what they want to say. Eventually you fade these things out, but we'll get them to practice what they're going to say before they say it, and then we'll go, okay, so I'm going to hold the button, you're going to say, and you'll give them the first 3 words of their sentence, and it's enough to get them rolling. And eventually you're fading those things out, and they're doing those things on their own, but that sometimes you need to go down to that level.
Yeah, and make sure the student doesn't feel overloaded. But we've also had the experience where you get a kid who's all over the technology side of things. I've had grade 4s put the headset on, they're like, I've got the button, and away they go. And kids with really strong oral language skills, you can't stop them. And they'll be saying, you know, sentences at a time, and it's really encouraging to see that. But just be aware that each student's different and that as the trainer, it's your job to make it a stress-free process for that student and to gauge, you know, are we trying to do too much? Are we overloading them with our expectations?
So if I could summarise that in a nutshell, it's not going to be, and we don't just get this with kids, by the way, for Dragon, we get people who want to take it out of the box and use it straight away, and that's been the case for a long time. The technology still isn't that easy. There's Dragon for adults now is about as easy as it can, well, it's very easy, it works very well out of the box. But if you're buying it for a child or a student, then you may need to be prepared to work through the kind of process you've just heard described, and it's going to be very much tailored for what that individual can handle and how the best way of working with them can be set up.
And I guess dyslexic students grow up to be dyslexic adults. You get better, things improve, but there are still a lot of dyslexic adults that could not set up Dragon on their own because the correction process to adapt to their voice requires that spelling input. And if they don't have that, then they will need to pair up with someone else. So that I guess it's something to keep in mind. It's not
a good
necessarily
point.
just for kids. It is an adult thing as well. Yeah.
Anyone with some kind of communication issue,
Yeah.
they might need some support.
Yeah.
So a little tip when you are going in that correction phase is to correct what the student says, not what you would have wanted them to say. So for some students, they might make grammatical errors when they're talking, like her go to the shops, or you would want it to say she goes to the shops.
Or she went to the
or
shops.
she went to the shops,
Yeah.
or something different. And look, that can be, something that you model correctly for them. But when you're putting that into Dragon, you would type in what they actually said, because we need the typing or the writing on the screen and what the child's saying to match for Dragon to learn their speech. So that's really important. You don't want to go changing the input, and because you can really mess up a profile from that point of view.
And I think when you're teaching kids to dictate, they often will, especially Aussies, will shorten things to "I'm gonna." we get gunners a lot. It's important. We actually put that in.
Oh,
and
okay.
train
So you
it
added
as,
that to the vocabulary.
Yeah, I'm gonna go to the shops. And then you're obviously later on, when you're working on formulation and written language skills, and you're able to work at that punctuation, grammar,
And talking
tense.
about more formal language versus conversational
Correct.
language.
Like we don't walk around saying furthermore, but when you're doing that kind of it's okay to do that in writing. That's when you're kicking it up a gear and you're focusing on higher level literacy skills. So we talk about that once the profile
Are there any
is
other words
accurate.
you add apart from gunner?
There's probably quite a few.
Well, that's a good point, because when we're training, we work on school topics and school work. Obviously, the end goal is that they'll be using it in the classroom for school assignments and school classwork. So when we're training it, we don't get them to copy something out of a book or parrot something that we've generated. We want them to come up with their own ideas, if it's what they did on the weekend or summarising what they learnt in English that day, so that Dragon's learning not only their speech and their voice, but also their class content and any vocabulary that they're doing there.
And it's also teaching them the skill of dictation. So
Yeah.
we're sort of actively trying to help that formulation and that language process at the same time.
So something that may help the Dragon trainers, it can be difficult if you've got one of those really verbose, loves to talk students, and they go for 2 sentences and then you've got to go back and correct. It can really test out your working memory. So the play that function in Dragon can be really, or the playback, function in Dragon can be really helpful to listen back to what they said so that you can find where Dragon's gone wrong and input those corrections.
And we do in our sessions, again, because it's a collaboration between the student and the trainer, we will actually set the computer settings so that the audio plays back through the computer, not through the headset, yet it's only listening to the headset for the mic capabilities. So that as the trainer, you're hearing exactly what that student said at that time and then can therefore apply those corrections.
And later down the pathway, when you're more looking at taking it into the classroom, we fade out the amount of correction and support that we're giving, and
It's just not necessary either.
Yeah, as the profile gets more accurate, you don't really need to be correcting everything, but you want the student to be editing back their work to look out for any errors they might be making, whether it be Dragon made a mistake or whether it be they could have said it with better wording or that kind of thing. So the onus becomes on the student to do their own editing. And that can be with a text reader like Read and Write Gold or with the Read That function in Dragon. But we tend to prefer using the text reader because it highlights the words like karaoke, follows along for the students so they can hear and read at the same time.
And we know that has more neurological benefit from that remediation perspective, I guess.
And the last thing before I let you jump
sorry.
on is back up the profile regularly. So with this training, we're really talking about Dragon Naturally Speaking. It's a bit different with Dictate and the app, but Dragon Naturally Speaking, you're able to export the profile onto a USB or hard drive or cloud-based.
And when we say backup, we actually mean export, in that you should take it off the computer that you've got, because if something happens to the program and you need to uninstall it and reinstall it, or there's corruption to that profile, something goes wrong, you want to have your profile saved, because if you've put a student through this training process and then you tell them, sorry, we've lost the last 6 months of work and you need to start again, they will kill you.
Yes,
So
it's worth its weight in gold.
it is, and it's really not necessary once the profile is accurate to continue exporting it like that. Once it's got that level of accuracy, but in that initial training phase, really important.
Yep. So save it to the cloud, use Dropbox, or
Yep.
if you've got your national broadband network connection, it'll be really fast.
Yes.
Wonderful.
All right. So I think we're talking about
Some common concerns.
and this will touch on a lot of the questions that have come through. We won't be able to touch on all of them, but one of the ones I guess we hear the most is that we are, by giving these tools to students, somehow giving them too much of a leg up, and that this is, I guess, letting them cheat and get around whatever their difficulties are. And I would say yes, it is. that is the point.
Does
But
that
it's-
come from the perspective of they're getting an advantage over students
It's-
without those
it's-
difficulties,
it's-
or from
yeah.
the point that they really should be doing it, learning to do it the proper way?
A bit of both. A bit of both. There's very much, especially, well, why should this student have it and not this student? And I guess that comes down to funding issues a lot of the time, unfortunately. But what we'd be saying is what we're trying to do with students with definable, diagnosable neurological impairments. And we know, for example, dyslexia is a neurological impairment. We can stick people into functional MRI machines and see that they're not lighting up in the correct area. So we know it's an actual processing problem. What we're doing here is not actually...
It's not an unfair advantage.
No, we're actually providing that equality of education. And the point of education is to allow students to reach their potential, not to reach the potential of the student sitting next to them. So we have real issues, I guess, with that. And I guess it comes back to the ideas of disability standards and inclusiveness and differentiation, which are big buzzwords in education at the moment. And it should be about what does that student need to succeed or to reach their potential. So for us, it's more about equality than some kind of leg up or too much of an advantage.
Right. I mean, I've seen strange things like students with visual impairments who are allowed to have a scribe, for
Correct.
example, in exams to write everything, but they're not allowed to use Dragon, which again doesn't
Yeah,
make a
and
lot
look,
of sense.
and this is where I think it's one of those instances, especially in Australia, where legislation policy within educational institutions really needs to step up because it's not reflecting what we see as our goals. The point of using this technology and not using a reader or a scribe is independence, and it's really important for students with varying difficulties to have that level of independence. They can't carry around another human for the rest of their life to read and scribe for them. So why would we set them up with those strategies for education if they're not going to be able to carry them through in life? So for us, independence with assistive technology is key. And that's for our philosophy is that education should be setting students up for life, not so that they can pass tests. And I guess that's something we get really passionate about. But and it's usually not the people who work within the systems that are the issue. It's getting those systems to reflect what's actually happening in the classrooms at the very moment.
Are there any, I know, for example, I think in Tasmania there were some schools that were allowed to use Dragon for examination settings. Are there any systems or places which seem to have it particularly done well?
Yeah, and it's really interesting because obviously we work in a smaller area. You can go 5Ks one way and have a school that will not allow it to be used for exams, and move 5Ks in the other direction. It's not an issue.
And I think we've found that it's more about communicating well with the teachers and the school staff and the parents and everyone being on board and feeling supported. Where I think it falls down is that it's a child's taken the software into the classroom and the teachers kind of been given this unrealistic expectation that student should use that, and then something goes wrong and no one really knows what to do and feels like it's a failure. So we often do transitioning school visits to sit in with students and to answer any teachers' questions. So I think it's a process, and as long as you're supporting everyone throughout that process and troubleshooting as you go, it can make it smoother and more successful.
Yeah.
So that conference we met at, we were talking earlier about one presentation which basically said that Dragon couldn't be used in schools, and then we'd actually, in classrooms I guess, and then we actually went and heard a talk by, I think she was 16 or 17 years old, a student who described how she used Dragon in the classroom and it worked really well for her, and she went through her whole senior HSC, whatever we call it in the different states these days, and accomplished amazingly using that process. Is that, how does Dragon work in classrooms?
So I guess we're sort of about to get to that point, but
sorry.
no, it's fine. The other thing that we, before we touch on that, was the other thing we get, which is linked to that assistance versus equality, is that people are worried about students using this technology and losing handwriting skills and losing the drive to write or to read, and it's actually the opposite. We get them engaging with text more, which is important for fixing issues. And as far as handwriting skills go, I guess these kids usually have such limited access to writing, even if they don't have physical difficulties, but because of their spelling, they just don't get through the quality and they don't have the quantity of work, that there might be a payoff with handwriting, but what we look at is what are they missing out on by not using the software. And really, what kind of workplaces are we setting these students up for? There are very few workplaces now where handwriting is necessary. So I guess it's also, we're in that really transition period. We no longer use calligraphy, you know, but it's a dead art.
Well, Finland, for example, where they're going to stop teaching cursive is an interesting example.
And some states in America have already stopped it. They focus on print and typing skills because that's what the world is requiring of students now. So,
and at a practical level, I think some concerns in the classroom are distracting other students with students, talking.
That, I guess that's what was
Yes,
my
where
main
you were getting
concern.
to,
How does that work?
Yeah, so Shannon, take it away. Yeah.
So our big push is no pull-out support when using this technology. So they are in the classroom, they are sitting at their normal desk, and people have really big issues getting around this, especially teachers, which I understand because it is a disruptive element. Interestingly, looking at things like the position of the student in the classroom can make a huge difference. So typically with learning support, in most cases, we recommend those students with difficulty sit right up the front, in front of the teacher, ready to get assistance if they need it. When they are transitioning to using the technology in the classroom, we actually suggest they sit at the back.
Or to the side.
To the side at the back, yeah. Really what that does is means that they don't feel like they're being watched by all the people behind them, which is really important from an acceptance point of view. And also the sound around them, their voice is travelling a little bit forward, but it just seems to work much better for everyone.
And you can calibrate the microphone to pick up a really quiet volume, and we find that with the ambient noise that's always around in a classroom, it's really not an issue. It can be hard to get students to monitor their own volume, but it's just teaching them to do that, like the dictation skill.
It's just part of the training
It's part
process.
of the training, yeah.
But I think people are usually really surprised when we do demos where we have the headset on and we'll be not very far away from the audience and we will speak and it will accurately go up. And I think people have this weird perception that they need to speak quite loudly. So at the moment, the volume I would be using would be insane in a classroom environment, and you don't need to speak that loud. You need to have some vocal fold vibration going on, so no whisper. But it is really interesting, and most of the teachers who have been really against using this in the classroom have been pleasantly surprised when we've gone in for those initial sessions and they've said, oh, they can use it, yeah, not a problem, keep using it, it's not an issue.
So Sarah says, my son is reluctant to use Dragon in class as he doesn't like to speak out loud. How can I help him overcome his reluctance?
Yeah, so this one's a really hard one, and I sort of, I guess, comes around counselling through that issue. We'll actually probably touch on that a little bit more with some case examples that we've got coming up. But
I think a lot of the time it comes back to getting the profile to a level where students can see the benefit for themselves and feel that independence. I know that with students we've worked with who have big anxieties about using it in the classroom, once they see how much easier it makes their life, and once you are able to talk them through what you can do to make it easier for them, I suppose the stress and the anxiety lessens. And we've done things like have presentations in the classroom where the student explains to their class, this is what I'm going to be using, and Shannon may have gone along and done a bit of an explanation. And just really, I think the big things are education and support for everyone involved, and then it's a much easier process.
And I guess it's that judging when to put it into the classroom
that's a good
really
point.
important. So
Yeah.
if you hold off too long, what you can do is build
You can
up
build it up, can't you?
build up the anxieties in their head as, I can't talk out loud in class, what are you possibly, what are you
I
doing
only
to
do
me?
it in the clinic
Okay, yeah, I
with
can't do that. So sometimes it becomes bigger than Ben-Hur, and there have been a lot of times where we've gone into the classroom and gone, I don't care, you're going to use it. And there's almost that hard line approach. You might not like brushing your teeth, but you're going to do it. So we go into the classroom and sometimes we'll actually sit there and go, and they're like, okay. And we've used the quiet voice,
Yeah.
we've done all of that. And then you'll get them mid-assignment or mid-class word and you go, look up. How many,
No one's looking
let's
at
count
you.
how many people are watching you. And there's this kind of aha
Acceptance.
moment where they go, oh yeah, no one gives a stuff. No one cares what's going on with me.
Okay.
So-
So get them basically get them to do it.
Just do it.
Just do it.
Do it.
And
Just
plan for
rip
tech
Band-Aid off.
issues.
Yes.
Make that a really normal part of the process. Gremlins live in computers and it won't always work right. And just having that kind of realistic expectation that things might not always go to plan, that's okay. That's part of learning how to troubleshoot the issue or having a backup plan.
And why we advocate, I think this came up in some of the questions, why we advocate, we talk about grade 4 is a really good time to start talking about introducing this into the classroom. If they're not doing things independently by grade 4, where they're really flicking from learning to read and write to needing to read and write to learn, and there's certainly those expectations of more independence, it's time to start teaching them to do those higher level skills in a way that we're not pulling down their cognitive resources. So we really do start quite young. And that is, again, not because we expect it to work term 1, grade 4, but because they have a limited amount of time before they hit high school and 12 teachers, and they need that caring, supportive, one teacher environment to work their way through and, I guess, grow up learning how to structure writing in that way.
And using it for even little bits of work. It doesn't have to be, all right, we're using Dragon for the big class assignment this term. It could be, I'm going to get you to write some sentences about your spelling words this week. Get Dragon out. You know, the more practice you do for big and small tasks, the more it just becomes second nature and habit forming for that student.
Okay.
So other things that we've run into are having electronic resources available. So there's different ways that we get around that.
Yeah, so we have nowadays, one I prepared earlier, like portable scanners. You know, some schools are still in the runoff about 100 worksheets they've printed out from or copied from a book, making things like these scanners available so that they can scan, pop it straight into their computer, and there's the worksheet ready to be dragoned into. And there are certain PDF programs that make that accessibility a little bit easier with Dragon.
I know where you can get some of those.
Yes.
Actually.
Yeah, and so scanning's a really big one. Also, we find even if the student, even if the school doesn't have a laptop program, that the teachers have laptops and they're actually developing their own resources a lot. So USB, email it over to the kids if you've got that Wi-Fi connectivity. But yeah, it's trying to flick from that paper view into that soft copy kind of view that we all work with in normal workplaces, I guess.
And also that hybrid approach. So we encourage the use of assistive technology wherever the student needs it. It's not just I use Dragon for English and everywhere else I do it another way. If the student needs to write, they use Dragon. If they need to read, they might use a text reader. And you can make that work in a variety of ways. It can be doing everything on the computer, or if it's a maths problem solving question, you might have a worksheet up electronically on the screen and a worksheet there
in hard
copy so that they can do their working out, but they can be listening to the question to read it. And then if they need to write, how you sometimes have to justify your answer, how you got there, they can use Dragon to then dictate that sentence. So it's, I suppose, thinking outside the box and just thinking more about what's the purpose of the task, what tools can the student use to accomplish that, and not being afraid to, you know, have that hybrid approach as well.
Yeah, and that works quite well. Yeah.
Can I ask you one thing before it completely scrolls off the top of my screen?
Yes.
Fiona asks, she says, I know it's hard to estimate, however, for a dyslexic child with relatively good speech, how long would it take to train the child to work independently with Dragon?
How old?
Yeah,
it depends
yeah.
on the age as
Yeah.
well.
But I would say if they've got good oral language skills and there aren't any word finding or language problems going on associated, the examples that are coming up will give you a really good idea.
Okay.
And I think the earlier you start, the longer it takes, but the more acceptance you get when you transition into high school.
Yes, so a grade 4 student's speech might need more training.
Yes.
But their Dragon use, once they reach high school, will far outweigh a student you introduce in grade 9.
Yeah.
Even though a grade 9 student might get much better speech recognition accuracy immediately.
So it's akin to learning how to write. It's learning how
Right.
to-
Yeah. And it's growing. It's growing with it. I think that makes a really huge
Yes,
difference.
yeah.
These examples that we're about to go on to will be really interesting because some of these are the students that we've introduced at different times, I guess,
And with very different profiles.
yes. So
Yeah.
hopefully that gives a little bit more of an idea. And like we said before, we do have some dyslexic students who are in grade 4. We've started it with, and
A term in, they're using it in the class,
Yeah.
you know, starting to use it in the classroom, and the recognition accuracy is quite good.
it's good. And the
Yeah.
independence and the editing skills, and they don't have attentional problems or memory things going on. And they're the ones who go, oh, Missy, you having trouble with your computer? Let me fix. You know, they're the kids in class that are just all over the technology. So we tend to find some of those students, some won't wait for our go ahead to put it in the
They
classroom.
go, I used Dragon in class yesterday, and you go, you did?
How did it
wasn't ready
go?
for this.
And they're like, oh, it was okay. It had a few problems, but what do we do when this? And it becomes that troubleshooting kind of session rather than you now have permission to take it into the classroom. So it's really personality based as well.
Yeah.
There are some kids
Yeah.
you give the technology to, and it's not great, and they don't care.
Yeah. And it's a really child-led process.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we
Okay,
try to do
interesting.
that. Yeah.
For the hard-headed realists out there, would you put a proportion on the number of people a number of kids that it actually helps? Or how would you quantify it?
Would you say 50?
Evidence-based, all that stuff.
Yeah, look, it's really hard because most of it's anecdotal at the moment. There aren't really hard facts. I would say
From our caseload?
from our caseload, I would say it's
More
most.
upwards?
It's I would say most. I
Yeah.
don't know. I guess it depends what your goals are with that client. It's really hard. That sounds awful. We're just going, it depends. But when did they introduce it? So we have students that we had to introduce in grade 8, and we had lost so much ground with them that we were paying catch up too much. And realistically, it worked for them, but they weren't able to take it on as much as we would have liked. But then you look at, they might just use it in exams and assignments at home, so it's had a benefit for them. So I guess, what do you define benefit as? We've never had a student, I've never had a student at the moment walk away from it completely. So for me, it's most, but you, I guess, through the process, adjust your goals. There are some students who won't, I guess, use it in the classroom. You can't get past those barriers of anxiety. You can't get past those issues, and that needs to be okay as well. But how can you help them still grow in those other areas? So, like we said, it's not a cure-all. It's not something you just give and it works.
And classroom use might not be the goal for every student.
No.
You know, it might be that they use it in the privacy of their own home for an assignment, or in a separate room for an exam.
Yep.
And if that's fulfilling what they need it for, then we see that as a
success as well. And they can use the other assistive technology programs we've spoken about before and muddle their way through.
True. Okay.
Yeah. So we're going to talk about sort of, I guess, some case studies is probably the best way to put it.
Some of our success stories.
Yes, I know we are running out of time. We're going to be as quick as we possibly can. I think we'll quickly go through this one. This is a young boy, Henry. He is one of those students who was been using Dragon now for about 1.5 years, 2 years. He has multiple problems, so coordination problems, tremors, and oral dyspraxia, so his coordination of speech wasn't great, really, really severe dyslexia. So much so that you can't actually interpret what he's trying to get at when he writes, even at single word level. But he has a superior verbal comprehension index, so it's all up there. He knows what he wants to say, he understands what's going on, but did have sort of slower processing speed and working memory. His typing was really slow because of his coordination problems and his tremor, and it really wasn't an option even with prediction. Even the most sophisticated prediction software couldn't figure out where he was going. Huge technology lover. So he was the kid that we started off. His profile was really inaccurate and he didn't care. And this is a sample of his speech. So you can hear that even a student with speech difficulties, we're able to train with time. Yeah.
Hello, I am 12. I have used Dragon for 2 years from now. Dragon is better than typing because we don't have to spell it, because I am not that best at spelling. So, if you're dyslexic and need help with spelling, I recommend Dragon.
He wasn't paid for that endorsement at the end, but he was one of those kids that was just like, give it to me, give it to me, give it to me. And he wasn't initially allowed to use it at school. He took it and used it anyway. So we often find that some of our students drive that, I'm taking it into the classroom and get past those bureaucracies because they need it. And he used to get frustrated with his scribe. And eventually the scribe funding was cut, so it was a good thing that he just took over and took it in, and that was the end of it. But we took a fair bit of training because you could hear in his speech there were lots of effortful speech going on, some difficulties, and he had rehearsed that, so his speech had become a little bit better. So he's an interesting case.
So the next student, Ava, is similar to Henry in that she had severe dyslexia and had had several years of therapy to try and improve her literacy difficulties, with some progress made, but still just really struggling and not the progress that we'd hoped. She also has some language difficulties. When we play the clip, you'll hear that she has some trouble formulating her ideas, and that can be a bit of an issue for her. And she also has a bit of an unusual voice quality. So Dragon did take a bit longer to train for her for those reasons. But she was very hardworking and very competent with the IT side of things. And she started around end of grade 6, and the clip you're about to see is grade 8, with us working in a session on a school assignment.
It makes you feel and why.
See that she's really grasped that dictation skill, and the toolbar on the side is what she's using as a text reader to listen back and correct her own work.
It makes you feel and why. What effect it had on your relationships with people?
It's working quite well here. What you're about to see is when things don't go so well and how she can troubleshoot
on
that
your relationships with
as well.
people.
Oh, do we have a bit of
So
delay?
I think we're having a bit of a delay going on here, sorry.
Here we go. So she's talking about a character in the book, and you're about to see that Dragon didn't get that correct. So she's actually located the words that were wrong, and now I'm the one going in and training that so that it will learn that vocabulary
I will
for her
choose
classwork.
August.
Do you want to just...
If we're running out of time,
Because Julian is a pain in the book.
What's another way you could describe it?
Yep.
Oh, yeah, so you can hear that some of her
want
language
trustworthy
choices
friends.
aren't great, and we were obviously targeting her language skills at the same time.
August is kind.
So she uses a lot of pauses to try and think of what she wants to say.
Correct August.
And once again, you can see she's trying to do the correction process herself, but having some difficulty. So we were really working in the session on
Correct
helping her to
guess.
troubleshoot that.
And it's more because she could see it come up and say all guess,
Mm.
but
But she wanted it to say August.
so that's what she was correcting, but that wasn't what had come up on screen. Yeah. We might actually
we can leave it there.
Yeah, we might actually
that's
skip over
easier.
this one because I think it's becoming a little bit difficult. But
But it gives you a bit of an idea of how it works in action. So that was a session in class where I can work with her, a session with me working on classwork, so I can help her for when she does take it into the class.
And probably one of our, the next case, one of our most interesting students was Emma, talking about a student who was not a technology lover, was not going to use this in class, would not entertain the idea, and I could basically go away, but had a superior IQ. She gives most people a run for her money. We've had conversations about how I might visually represent my ethical framework and how I morally represent my... She's grade 6. So certainly bright would be a good way to describe her, and severely dyslexic. One of the most interesting profiles from a speech pathologist point of view. Had never been picked up on screening tests because her sound awareness was amazing, which is the main thing that teacher aides look at. But she has a very significant rapid naming problem, so her ability to access and store those patterns and map them onto the orthography or the written language we use was it was bad. We had years and years of intensive therapy based on all the current research, and it had some effect. Her reading did improve enough to be functional, but as you're about to see, we couldn't use word prediction for her. It wasn't an option, and we knew that we had to push her past the discomfort and the dislike of technology because she had no other option. And so that was a lot of acceptance that we had to go through, a lot of counselling about this isn't going away, this isn't getting better. If I had a cure, I would give you one. This is the best thing we can do. And to look at her now, so we started with her in grade 4, to look at her now, she's just hit grade 7, you wouldn't know she was the same student. And she was very much, loves handwriting, carries around notepaper and diaries and writes notes to herself. She can't read any of them and no one else can, but she loves that act of writing. We never stopped her from doing that. That was not the point, but it wasn't functional and it wasn't something she was going to be able to take with her. So I'm going to show you on the next slide, and we might actually use, sorry, Derek's typing away and answering people, but we're going to use him
sorry.
as, no, you're right, we're going to use him as a bit of a guinea pig. Sorry, we're going over time. But could you have a go at decoding this list that she had written? It was preparation for a school
So a student has written this and you want me to say what I think it says.
Yep.
Good luck.
Bulsa blocks, Belsu?
Yes, so what is it in English? What does that mean?
Bulsa blocks. Bulsa blocks. I have no idea.
All right, give the
Some
third
kind of
one down a go.
Horu hopes.
Yep, so do you have any idea what she was going for?
Hula hoops?
Nicely done, okay.
Oh, okay.
Without context, very, very impressive.
I got that one. The next one?
Yeah?
What's that? Yordeloi.
Yeah, don't give that one a go. Go the next one down.
Fire stress.
Yeah, can you-
Fire stress.
Have you got any ideas?
Boisterous. Boisterous? Boisterous? No,
Okay, if I give you a bit of context, so she was writing a list for a circus performance. Remember, her IQ is
Oh,
off the Richter scale.
Fire stress. Fire stress. No, I can't
No.
get that.
So that's fire sticks. I'll show you the
Oh,
crack,
okay.
the code, the next slide. That's her list. Now, the day she wrote this, she's probably got about a 24-hour period. Sometimes it can go up to about 48, where she can read back her writing. After that, she does the, yeah, I've got nothing. So she actually can't read back her own writing either. And interestingly, in our session, she's great. She'll see a lot of people doing this, and she goes, "You're reading something I wrote?" So she's learned to pick up the cues of, it's my writing, but it's taken a long time to get there. We had a lot of tears, a lot of frustration.
But it was worth it
It
because
was.
the next thing brings tears to your eyes when you think
Yeah.
how much she was held back until she was able to access her language skills and put them into words with Dragon.
So I'm going to put it on the next slide, but I'll read it out loud to you as well. This was a piece of writing done about the same time as that list. By the time the sun rose, she was at the top of the hill where the daisies grew. The daisies were so beautiful. The yellow middle of the flower was the colour of the bright sun, that beautiful warm yellow, and around the edges were the white petals, so delicate and dainty as they swayed in the gentle wind. Verity just loved the daisies, the way they felt under her feet when she danced around them, and the way they tickled her hair. You know,
Beautiful.
That's when your work must be the most
It is
rewarding.
so
It
rewarding.
is, and
Fantastic.
trust me, it was worth being yelled at because you could see this student be, I guess, released, and she's now operating at a level that matches her cognitive ability, her language ability, and for us, that's crucial. So. She still writes notes, she still does all of that, we haven't stopped it, but this is something that she'll take to university and she will take into the workplace, and I think that's really important.
And we have other students, you know, who that's the case as well. She's obviously one of the most intelligent and I suppose students with the most well-developed oral language skills, but really it's about that student achieving what they're capable of, and we have lots of lovely examples like that.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. I really love that.
Yeah. So I think we were going to leave some time for questions and answers, but we talked too much.
We're speech pathologists.
Oh, we've
we
done well. I guess I think we've done. Apologies to a couple of people there. We have a time delay here, and I've lost the context on a couple of questions there. Mintamosa asked, it was a general question about the range of students with whom the work has been done. I'm not sure I understand that one.
If I'm
do you wanna-
interpreting correctly,
Yeah.
I guess we haven't touched on. I guess we work with students grade 4 to into university.
Into university.
We help them transition. They're the ones we spoke about before that have dyslexia, dyspraxia, some oral and written language disorders. So both are impaired, both their oral language and their written language. Typically, our clients, because we're a private practice, they are coming to us with those difficulties rather than us seeking them out. And we work in a variety of settings, so both public, private, be that independent, Catholic, Lutheran, Anglican, any variety, and in both primary and secondary, right up. Primary schools are probably the most difficult because there's a persisting idea that they can fix or that we can get round this and that we should persist with traditional models. That's changing, I guess. That's what we see. High school, it becomes a little bit easier, though in Queensland where we work, we currently have issues with students not being able to use the assistive technology for years 11 and 12 for their exams, but they can use it for their assignments. So we work the system as much. It's incomprehensible, I guess, to us, but that's the rules. So they tend to do A or B work in their assignments, and they get Ds or low Cs in their exams, and it sort of evens out. So we look at other ways to get them into tertiary study if that's what they want to do, whether going for an OP is worth it. But again, we're about to change in Queensland and switch over to more of the similar system that you have in New South Wales. So we're hoping that, I guess, those changes reflect use of assistive technology. We really don't know, but we've not been able to push for a senior 11 and 12 exams for them to use this.
And use of dragging can be to get around handwriting issues if it's a problem actually writing, you know, down the words you want to say. We can use it with students who it's a problem with that spelling in that respect. So it's that they could write it, but it would be like you saw Emma's writing. And as we said earlier, it can be used with students who have English as a second language. So it's really diverse software that can be used to get around a number of different access issues.
Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. Well, not fantastic. I think.
But it's fantastic the options
Yeah.
there.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
it's
for
just
them.
trying to push for change, and I guess trying to get what's happening in the classrooms to match what our legislation says. I think there was a really good question that came in prior about handling the bureaucracy, and it's something that I guess we struggle with. Again, there's legislation in place. It exists in Australia. We have the Disability Standards for Education Act. It's finding, I guess, pushing and advocating is a really big part of our job, and it's a part of the parent's job, we find, because no one cares about that student more than their parent. You know, they're the strongest advocate. And there are a lot of parent groups that have sprung up, especially in the dyslexic area, trying to push for, you say they have these problems, you can't provide funding, we're providing outside sourcing and funding and providing these tools, and then they can't use them. So you know, you're not matching what legally your requirements are in education. So I think it's sort of an instance of watch this space.
But there
and-
are things where really good stuff's
Yes,
happening with
yeah.
teachers who are really on board.
Yeah.
And like I said, you know, communicating and having that team approach makes a big difference. I think even, you know, if it's not a system-wide change, we're seeing that, you know, classrooms and schools that are really getting on board.
And we've got schools that we've been able to introduce Dragon, for example, into the classroom for a couple of students, and they've seen how amazing it's been. And from a funding point of view, we suddenly haven't had to have a reader and scribe for that student, which costs money.
Or the school's invested in site licenses.
Yes,
to,
and it's
you
pushed
know,
them
set
to
it
go,
up.
okay, we've got
Yeah.
about 20 other people I can think of just off the top of my head that need this. And that has then pushed that school to change their system. So I guess it's slowly. And really, there was a question about if the computers at school can't support the software, it's then going in and saying, well, this is what my student needs. In the same way that I need glasses to be able to see, it would be unthinkable for you to take these glasses off me for, you know, for
So that you
for
can
my
do your job,
exam,
yeah.
because they're somehow giving me a leg up or assistance. It should be the same for these kinds of access issues.
So one last question.
Yep.
And it's one that I get a lot because people come to me and I say, well, you need some tailored advice, you need a custom solution for your daughter or your son, and I don't know where to send people to talk to because we can't clone you guys.
No.
There's only a few of you. So,
No, yeah.
and particularly for people who aren't in the capital cities, what
Yeah,
are
it's a
the
big
options?
issue.
Are there any? Are there many?
There aren't many, and that sounds, I guess, there isn't anywhere to go to train to do this stuff. I guess when we started, it was just a process. I've got to do something. I can't leave these kids to struggle, and so a lot of it was bumbling through, having clients happy to at least have you try something with them, and self-training. But my big thing would be to look to AT blogs and people, especially in the States, that are working on these, link into events that are going on. You find like-minded people and train yourself that way, and that works for parents as well. So it's hard to reach the number of people that need this kind of support. If we're just talking about dyslexia alone, it affects upwards or up to 20% of the population, and there aren't enough people, I guess, at the AT forefront yet. So I wish I had a really nice answer,
that's okay.
positive way to end on. It is really hard.
We've done something tonight to help the cause in that respect, and it's something that many of us who work in the area are very passionate about, using the technology to help people, and we very much want to move this forward as one of the things that Dragonology does in the future as well. So I'd like to offer my very sincere thanks to you both for coming down from Brisbane
Yeah, no,
today.
thank you for letting us
It's
come.
a hard trip to come down to Sydney, and we appreciate your contribution. It's been fantastic getting some real world examples, and I hope people out there have found it useful. Please let us know what you think. If there's anything you can suggest that we can push the cause forward as far as getting students access to the sorts of help that they need. And I don't just mean Dragon here, I mean across the board with assistive technologies. We'd love to be part of that. So thank you once again. This webinar has been recorded and will be available on the Dragonology website at www.dragonology.com.au, probably within the next few days. And thanks to everyone concerned here tonight, and we look forward to seeing you next time. The next event will be announced in the next few days. Look for an email for those of you in Brisbane in particular, and we'll be back online in the near future too. Thank you very much.